Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. We're gonna have a little sit down video today, one topic video. And I apologize if it's dark. I have a ring light thing, but it works, it needs to be charged with a USB cord and I can't find the USB cord that goes with it. So 5 million USB cords in this house and I can't find that one. It's fine. Today I wanted to talk about my antique mall booth, my vintage booth that I no longer have it. And I wanted to share with you the real honest, background to what happened, why it didn't work out for me, and just tips and tricks for those of you looking to get into an antique mall. I do think it can be a viable source of income, for people, but you have to know some certain things going into it. So hopefully my mistakes you can learn from, and if you do go into this, you can have a better experience. So just a little background, I've been reselling on eBay since 2005. I was gonna say 2020, no, 2005. 2005, mostly secondhand vintage items, hard goods as we call them. So non-clothes. I have sold clothes, but mainly I was selling hard goods that were vintage, 20 years or older. We have an antique mall in our area. It's called Calico and Company. I think there's about 65 vendors there. I always considered it like the Frou Frou Antique Mall. It's so nice. Everybody in there has beautiful booths, wonderful pieces of vintage and antiques at higher prices that I feel. It's like, so for a reseller, it's hard to go shopping at places when you're like, well, I could sell it for that. You know, I can't buy it for that because I can't sell it for that. So the mentality, it's just hard to look in those places for me. But there is that one. That wasn't ever going to be an option for me because I don't have a look. I don't specialize in one particular thing, where a lot of, I think, the successful booths at Calico do. They generally have, things are more cohesive. You know, you don't have to sell just one type, but it's more cohesive. Whereas I'm just like a hodgepodge, you know, including I'll sell clothes, I'll sell replacement parts, you know, I don't have a limit. It was just mainly vintage. So, but I'd always wanted to try an antique mall booth, and then a new place opened up in our city and I decided to go down there and ask about it. And I did sign up for a booth. Here is where, looking back, this wasn't going to work, for me. And I'll get to that, but things I should have known in the beginning. I did sign up for a booth, $75 a month. They take 10%. It was basically a 6-foot wide space with about 3-foot walls on it on either side, but usable space was probably about 2 by 5 by 2 when you considered the shelves. They did provide just shelves on the back of the wall, but then there was pegboard on the side and you had the bottom to fill in. And then I very quickly was like, oh, I'm going to need more space. So I rented a second booth. So I was doing $150 for 2 of these spaces per month with them taking 10% for commission, which is a pretty good rate in the vintage antique mall world. So I had that. I started in April, and shortly thereafter, my brother, who had an antique store, a vintage store, most of you know that he became ill, he downsized, he was closing that. So he started a booth there too. He was there less than a month before he passed away. So that's when I got the second booth, because I was going to take over his space, but then they just moved me so I could have the 2. So that's how that ended up working. And about a month or 2 after being there, she approached me if I would wanted to do their Facebook page for them. And another mistake, I was like, okay, well, in exchange, like, she's like, well, we'll pay you, or what can we figure out? And I said, well, how about rent for just one booth, $75? I shouldn't have done that. Anyway, we'll get to all that. But so, then paying $75 for the 2 booth spaces plus the 10% commission, but I was doing the Facebook page, and I did that for up until like November or something. So that was the mechanics of it. So let's talk about why it didn't work out and what I should have realized going in. Number one, it was a brand new store. Now that doesn't mean that you can't go into a brand new store, but it was a brand new store run by people who are not dealers. They didn't know anything about antiques or vintage. The husband sells sports cars, he's a card collector, and that's a big part of their business. I'd say probably a tenth of the store's area, maybe more, is devoted to the sports cards. And they do well there. He also sells them on their website. So I think sports cards are where a lot of the money comes in from. But it was a new mall run by people who didn't understand vintage or antiques. They'd run a pet store before in a city they used to live in. So there was that. But you can learn vintage. You can learn vintage. Number 2 is small. Calico and Company, I believe they have 65 vendors there, which is kind of small for most antique malls. You're wanting like 150 plus to make it a big space, So it's not even that big, but it does take you a while to walk through it. This place, I think, has room for 20 vendors. So it's not very big. And the other thing that was the real just like crap is it's not in a good location for shopping. It's in our downtown. We have a sprawling downtown that is divided over east side, west side, because the river goes through it. All kinds of streets, side streets. There's no one main shopping street. So it's a new mall, a small new mall run by people who don't know vintage, and it's in an out of the way location. It's on one of these side streets. There's basically no foot traffic. If you want people to come, you are going to have to get them to drive to our downtown, park. You got to pay for parking. Parking's a nightmare down there. And then go into this rather small store and stay in there long enough that they kind of, and then they're going to shop. And all those things work against it. Hindsight being 2020, if you are looking, a well-established mall in either a very high traffic location or they are very established, that people make it a destination and that it's a big place so that people go in and they're spending time in there and they have time. Not they come in and they can just zip around and leave, which I experienced a lot of when I was in there. People would come in and it would, they'd be like in there 5 minutes or so and they could look at the whole thing and then they're out. So that stuff. So those are definitely things to look for. I know when, if you're going into someplace new, have the sellers had any experience running a booth, reselling? Do they know vintage? Those are things that are important. If you're going somewhere established, talk to the other vendors. What are their experiences with the place? And see, if you can get a feel for it. And then again, where there's going to be shoppers, because in this day and age with online shopping, it is harder than ever to get people to go out to a brick and mortar, but really hard to get them to a brick and mortar that's not anywhere with other shopping. There are a lot of restaurants in our downtown. There's a nice gift shop down the block from this store, but it's not the kind of downtown where you park your car, you get out, you walk around for an hour or two, and then you get back in your car and leave. It's just not like that. So it had all of that going against it. Now, when I took on the Facebook page, this was my other mistake because I didn't know how much time I would need to devote to that. The $75 was nowhere near what someone doing someone's Facebook should charge based on what I was doing. I was doing 3 minimum posts a day on the days they were open, which was Tuesday through Saturday. I was spending hours every week going down, taking photos, editing the photos, creating the posts, scheduling the posts, hashtags, all the things. I was spending hours, like 3 to 4 hours minimum a week on it. That type of job is normally something you charge like $30 a month, hour for, and I was doing it $75 a month. So my time, I think she thought, she was like, oh, I'm paying somebody, and it's, That being said, I did it because I wanted the place to grow and I wanted my stuff to sell. But by focusing so much on their page, I neglected promoting my own page for the booth. That's another tip. If you're going to have a booth, create a Facebook page for your booth because it's local shoppers you want. There's no better place than Facebook to get local shoppers, and you need to promote your own booth. The other thing they don't do is advertising. She gets very upset if anybody makes any kind of suggestion or anything, and she kind of loses it. So anytime anybody would bring up advertising, she'd lose it. She'd be like, you just had to walk around. You just had to kind of walk around eggshells with her because she'd go off. Another thing I didn't like is that she would badmouth other vendors. and they would badmouth other businesses in the area. Somebody would come in and ask, oh, where around here can I eat? And they would specifically say, don't go to that place. They're also very active in a Facebook group for local restaurants. They're both active in there, and they will flat out post bad reviews of places. They will tell people, don't go here. And like, I told them at one point, you really can't do that because you're local businesses. You don't want your local business being trashed by other people. You can't do that. But I know they still did it. So that was very uncomfortable. They also smoked. The dogs were in there, which is fine. Love dogs. But when the dogs were puppies, they were peeing everywhere, as puppies do. And I was like, oh God, I finally, because I don't like confrontation and I didn't want to set her off. It's like, oh wow, you can really smell the pee over here. And then she did clean it up and made that better. But like the ashtray was by the front door. Like the last time I was in there, I could smell the smoke. So there was that. So yeah, it just wasn't a good environment. I don't want it to fail. I want them to do better. I tried the whole time I was there to gently give her tips and tricks to help her. When I said I couldn't do the Facebook page anymore, I did teach her how to use ChatGPT to at least write the Facebook page posts. But her photos, I mean, hopefully she gets better, but they're not good. She doesn't know vintage, so she doesn't take pictures of the actual good vintage items in the store. She'll just take pictures of random crap, and then they're not centered. It's just really bad. I hope she gets better. I don't want it to fail. But I can't help anymore. Like I tried the whole time I was in there. So yeah. Make sure they're established or they know what they're doing. A big mall and a well-trafficked or destination area are so important. Talk to the other vendors, see what's going on. Now, this was, when they started it, they did consignment and then they started to rent space, but they definitely promoted it as a vendor mall. And I think before, they were open about 6 months or so before I started there. And they like initially had people with crafts, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like Calico now has a lot of people that do like boutique clothes. I don't know how that sells, but they do allow it because I think a lot of people aren't doing vintage and antiques anymore. It's just a changing market. And a lot of people who were really into vintage and antiques are getting too old to do that. A lot of people who have antique mall booths also do it as a hobby. They do it for fun. I know where this place, there was one, she was just clearing out her own collection. I mean, she had amazing stuff, but she's just selling her own stuff. So I don't think she was even sourcing. So it's just tricky, but to find a place that, has good quality vintage and antiques that people are actively going, like when you go to Calico, there's always customers in there. I would go where I was and like nobody would be there. But then she's like, oh, we're so busy, I'm like, okay. My check wasn't really reflecting that, and my stuff was cheap. Like if the traffic had been there, I have no doubt that my stuff would have sold a lot better, but there just wasn't the foot traffic. Even when it went to 90%, I still had 5 loads to take to my car. Again, had there just been a little bit more foot traffic, I think all that would have sold, because at that point it was all under $1, most of it. So, but when you don't have customers, you're not going to sell anything. They don't advertise. I finally convinced them to join this Iowa Antique Network that promotes antique stores in Iowa. Some other suggestions of things, I was like, really need a sign on the front that says antiques, because you drive by and the name of the business doesn't have antiques or vintage in it. The windows, one of the vendors who is there has been doing the windows and is doing a really good job, so it looks beautiful now. But there's no sign that says antiques. Like, I'm like, it would really be nice to get a sign that said antiques, and people would know, because again, hard to get people to park and come in. And then the store selection as it is now. There are some really good vendors in there of really nice things, but they're not getting promoted, because while I did agree with her that like if individuals want to promote their individual booths, they need to do that themselves, but still the store should do it. And she's not focusing on the good quality vintage, at least yet. Hopefully she will. But it's just hard when the pictures that are getting shown online are just random junk that nobody is going to walk in, even if they were walking in. So it's unfortunate. But then she got it into her head that if you're a vendor, you have to promote your own stuff. They're not going to do it. but then would complain, well, if they sell this much stuff, they only get the 10%. And I'm like, you can't have it both ways. Like, you got to get people in here. And then they don't do any other advertising. So, and advertising is different now. I mean, we do still have a newspaper. We have like a circular of ads and stuff. But they're not doing any kind of advertising beyond now. She does the Facebook. I think she does one post a day, which is fine. But if the pictures aren't there showing the good stuff, I don't know. But I was in there last week and I was like, oh, I know it's hard with January and February being kind of social. Oh, we've been $500-$600 days. But this is another thing, is that when they have one good day, she thinks that that's all the time. So if they had one day that was great, then she's like, it's that way all the time. And that could have been the cards that sold, or it was a Saturday and something was going on and they got more customers in. The times that I did have a really good sales day were when something was going on downtown and it was near the store and they were working to get traffic down. Then they would have sales. But the rest of the time, it just wasn't enough. For me, it was something that was like, I wanted to get like $1,000 a month. And I just cannot see that happening in the location and the size, and the lack of promotion. And then that's going to mean other good vendors don't stay, they don't come in. And it is a changing market. You can go on eBay and buy everything. I think that's another thing that was a little different for me, is I do sell online. So when you do sell on eBay, it's really hard to pull something. It's like, well, should I put this in the booth and let it sit there forever? Or could I just sell it on eBay now? So that for me was a struggle, to like decide how long something can sit there. Another thing that I had to kind of like correct her in was that she would say, I don't want to be overwhelmed with a certain item. Like, they were doing really well selling Crocs, the big stoneware Crocs that people use as planners. And she's like, but I don't want a bunch of them. I'm like, no, you do. If you have customers coming in that are specifically looking for Crocs, you want a good selection so that they can choose from the selection and they can come back when they want more. Like before the holidays, I heard her talking to another vendor and she said, I don't want a bunch of vintage Christmas in here. I don't want anybody to have a whole booth of just Christmas. I'm like, no, you do. You do want you want good vintage Christmas and a lot of it. And she was like, oh, really? I'm like, yes. At Halloween, she was like so surprised at the vintage Halloween. So I'm like, yes, if people have good vintage stuff, especially Halloween and Christmas, those are the two big ones. If somebody had all vintage Christmas, you want them to have an all vintage Christmas booth, because that'll sell all year round. Oh, really? She didn't know that. So, hi, Charlie's mad. So those are the things. Not established, people who don't know vintage and antiques, again, they can learn. Small, no foot traffic. I'm glad I did it, because now I know if I ever did it again, what I would look for. I don't think I would ever do it again, because the other thing and the big thing was how physical the labor was and how much work it was. One of my friends told me it's so much work. They have I have 3 booths and they are very well established. They do really well. It's like, it's a lot of work. And I was like, how much work could it be? Pricing the items, the way they did it was barcodes. So putting it in the system, getting the labels out, getting the labels to print correctly on the sheets was a whole other mess. I wasted so much paper or these label sheets trying to get them to print, putting them on, dragging stuff down there, displaying. You really need to go like once a week and fluff your booth, add new items, constantly moving things around, because you're going to have your regulars who go in every week. And if your booth looks the same, they're just going to skip you. Even just moving stuff around. Every time I would go down there, I would leave a sweaty, dirty mess from moving everything around, taking the photos, so it is a lot of physical work. The hauling things, you guys know that one of the big things I don't want to do anymore with reselling is haul stuff around. And when you're doing vintage hard goods, things are glass, ceramic, pottery, wood. It's heavy. It's bulky. You're lugging it around. So that was another big, I can't do this. It doesn't work. If my brother was still alive, I think it would have been different. It would have been something we would kind of still do together, or at least like support each other with it. But with him gone, and then my dad not here, my dad would have loved it. Papa was still here. Papa would have been like, that would have been his booth, honestly. It'd be like, there you go. Because years ago, we had a place in Waterloo. I think it was called Waterloo's the largest indoor flea market, or Iowa indoor flea market, something like it. Years and years ago, if you're from Waterloo, it was on kitty corner from where the Brown Bottle is. If you know, you know. the building's no longer there. And he had like a bookshelf there, and he was selling his John Deere tractors and then buying more. But he had that, and that was a dusty old place, but he loved doing that, and he did well there. But so he would have loved it. But now that I'm on my own, I don't have any help. I don't have support. I don't have anybody to kind of, commiserate with here, with my dad or my brother. It's not for me. But if you are looking to get into an antique mall, I hope this didn't discourage you, because there is potential there if you just look for established malls in high traffic areas and they advertise, and the other vendors are happy. Those are just things you want to look for, and you can make it work. But again, make sure you start a Facebook page for your booth. That is so important to build a following for yourself. The mall can advertise, hopefully they do, but at the end of the day, everybody I've talked to who has a successful antique booth, that they promote themselves, and you need to do that. That's key. No matter how much the mall promotes, because they're not going to just promote your booth, they got to promote everybody. So those are my tips. Let me know if you currently have an antique mall booth. If you have any tips or tricks to share. I don't want to badmouth this place or badmouth them, because I want local business to succeed. I hope they get better. It just was not a good overall experience for a lot of different reasons. Not only just what was going on there, but also for me personally. So overall, it just didn't work. But that is the honest update. I think all total, I made like $1,000 there, but all the expenses from supplies and everything, I feel like it was a wash. But at least I tried it. At least I know. And hopefully these tips help you if you're making that decision. But anyway, if you guys like these type of sit down videos, one topic videos, definitely give this one a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.